They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking,
hi, this is Nico. You're listening to my dad Fall, also known as the White Rabbit, and James Jardine on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Buckle up and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were happy.
It is super hard not to bop along with that. I love that tune. That tune has been there for a long, long time with this podcast. I haven't given him enough shouts, but thanks to Josh Gabriel for letting me run that as part of the intro. That was kind of cool of you, dude. Hopefully one day he's like listening to this and he's like, oh, hey, that's my tune. I'm not hopeful, but whatever. All right, folks. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Back from vacation, all good, tanned, and tired, and ready to go, and then caught a head cold, of course, because that's what intercoastal travel, or it's not intercoastal. What is that? Not international. I guess trans-Pacific travel, long haul travel will get you. I don't know.
Travel. See, I think, Raph. It's just travel.
It's travel. Yeah, fair enough. All right, today's topic. I'm gonna give you the topic. I'm gonna introduce all the guests on this show, all of them, which I hope you know. This thanks to Jim. Thanks this is to you because this is your idea that I've simply decided to cash in on and make a podcast out of. So today we're talking Kelly Shortridge's column. Cybersecurity isn't special, and it probably shouldn't be, which is quite pointed. Makes a lot of great points, and of course we'll talk about it through the lens of the four of us. James, welcome back to the show. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing well, thanks. I wish I could say I was coming off a vacation too, but instead I'm actually getting ready to be on vacation. So I'm on the other side.
Nice. You going someplace warm or cold?
No, I'm really not going anywhere. Just taking time off. So I don't know. It depends on what the weather will be. Maybe it'll be warm. Maybe it'll be cold.
Yeah, fair enough. Roll the dice, baby. Roll the dice.
Yeah.
All right. In the square below me, the one and only Mr. Brandon Dunlap coming from Seattle, which I bounced through on my way back. What's up, dude?
Yeah. Not much. Not going on any vacations for the foreseeable future. Getting a puppy on Sunday, so I'm going to be busy with that.
Oh, good Lord. You're going to get a pre-house trained, or you get the house break?
Yeah.
Oh, no. I got to go through the whole kit and caboodle.
Oh, good Lord. Was it like either a puppy or a kid? Is that one of those things? Or just
no, it's dogs only. My mother actually has a bumper sticker that says, ask me about my grand dog. So.
Wow. That's a good one. All right. And last but certainly not least, the cause of this kerfuffle. Hey, Jim, how are you?
Hey, nice to be identified that way. Yeah. Hey, how you doing, fellas? Good to be on board again once again. So, yeah, looking forward to this one. It could be interesting. Let's just say. I'm gonna kick this off by saying, so Kelly's article, which I will post, I'll put it in the show notes. I hope you guys read the show notes. Do you guys read the show notes? I've asked that before. Please read the show notes. They're easier to read now with more readability. So I'm gonna read you the intro to this because it's important. And then we'll go from it. The cybersecurity programs are infamous as gatekeepers. Yep. Power tripping in their virtual CAT machines to dump roadblocks and jackhammer potholes on software delivery. This draws ire from nearly every other software delivery stakeholder, but is often justified due to the fact that in fact, is in air quotes, by the way, that cybersecurity reflects a uniquely complex set of challenges. This is not, in fact, a fact. It is closer to propaganda. Ouch. Cybersecurity isn't that special, agreed, and cybersecurity shouldn't be that special if you want to minimize the damage of cyber attacks in our software systems. In this post, I'll excoriate special Snowflake security programs that offer opportunities for how we can make our programs more constructive rather than constrictive. Oh, that's good. I missed that earlier. All right, so let me kick this off. And what I'll say is
she's clearly coming at it from a perspective of somebody that works in software development or has a long history in software development, because this is where it's aimed at, right? This is aimed at all those AppSec programs over the years where we came in and said, thou shalt do the following 74 extra things. And every developer ever has told us to go, politely find a short pier and take a long walk. I completely feel her disappointment and her rage in that opening, because I've worked that job. I've been in that industry for quite some time, and I get it. I don't think it covers the totality of cybersecurity is where I think this breaks down. So, gentlemen, I'll open up the floor and just throw down. Let's see what you got.
Where to begin?
I
think that there are some good points. I think it's not the best way to go about it. Leading off with we're infamous as gatekeepers and power tripping. There seems to be a lot of digs. Makes me wonder if Kelly's had a lot of bad experience with her security teams.
I got to tell you though, we've totally been gatekeepers, and I've been there. Like, security has, as long as I've been in this job, a gatekeeper, yes, often a power trip over. I mean, guys, this is literally how the industry grew up.
That's why we're the no people, smarter, right? Like, that's why we're the no, right? That's always been the case. Like, it's no for everything.
We're the small group that knows more than you do. And so, Jim, I'm going to hand this to you before you explode. Go.
Yeah, I'm about to pop. So a couple quick things. One is, I do agree where you started the conversation off with regards to the role of security and application creating this technical sort of conflict. And that's been, in my opinion, exacerbated by the introduction of cloud and all that cloud represents, and sort of everything is in software, right? So you do security in software and all that applies. But I really want to be careful, because when we say, oh, that's how, security was born, actually, I was around when it was born, you know what I'm saying? And so there was a lot of effort to really understand what was going on technically and operationally. And then all of a sudden, as things became moving forward, all of a sudden it turned into this, I need more respect. I need to have a seat at the table. And I need, I need this, I need this. And then all of a sudden you started seeing indications, or started seeing behaviors that became adversarial by nature, right? And that was, in my opinion, the pivotal point, if you will, which I think happened only over like a couple of years. And you started seeing really interesting activities by, my way or the highway kind of thing. And you're too stupid to understand security. And then what happened was it sort of continued to rotate in that direction and became very insular, right? It just kept going. It kept its own momentum. And that momentum, in my opinion, also was fueled by this sort of bubble. Like, we were in this, in this tight bubble talking to one another, right? This echo chamber. Meanwhile, guess what? Other folks were getting good at security, right? So app developers and stuff like that were finding ways to still be successful, while we collectively at that point in time were looking for justification of our identity in some cases. And I think it just kind of created this environment. So like there's things that she said, I'm like, yeah, I kind of get it. You said it in a really kind of awful way, to Brandon's point, but you said it. So anyway,
well, we set ourselves up pretty early on. Maybe not your early on, Jim, but my early on, right? Like, it was a big setup of, especially in the AppSec world, we're like, oh, your code sucks, your app is crap, right? Like, there was a lot of negativity that broke down those barriers between the development side of the house and the security side of the house, because it was just that. I mean, I remember going to presentations and, that's all you're hearing, right? Your code sucks. Every time you'd see a vulnerability, oh, this new vulnerability in this app, oh, they don't take it seriously, their code sucks. They, everything has been completely negative about that, right? Which didn't help build the relationships that I think over the last few years, we're seeing that switch, right? That's swinging, kind of correcting itself. But I think it's slow getting into a lot of the organizations, especially bigger organizations, that have had stuff for a long time. Right, it's a lot harder to swing that ship than it is maybe like smaller new startups.
Well, let's look back. I mean, Jim, I think we probably started at the same time, shortly after the earth cooled in security. You know, those were the days where application development in-house was the purview of the CIO as the order taker, and you would still have to drop 3 CDs into a server to build it, right? Now, with infrastructure as code, right, you've got infrastructure people who have, shall we say, a lack of discipline in many cases when it comes to development. You know, maybe they were scripting, maybe they've moved on to PowerShell, maybe they're Unix admins before and left everything on their own machine. Now they're having to learn the discipline of software development. And at the same time, we're asking these developers to learn all the intricacies of infrastructure. So the worlds have kind of come back together, Jim, to your point. But I found that in this particular post, while I appreciate the perspective and reliability is near and dear to my heart, having spent nearly all my career in and around critical infrastructure, many of the tactics, shall we say, in the list of what to do instead of road blocking are largely, in my opinion and experience, untenable, not scalable, and don't deliver the quality and value that I think she's advocating for. Specifically, self-certification to guidelines, never seen it work. Integrate security design reviews into general design and architecture review processes and code reviews. That doesn't scale. You can have any number of security champion programs you want to roll out, but you can't cover all of those bases, especially in large decentralized development organizations where every business function has their own cadre of developers. Asking for standardized patterns and standard libraries that's not fraught with hazards. Isn't that what the whole prospect of like SBOMs and pipelines is all about, is defining those types of things? That might work. Abandoning the perimeter. Hey, we've been trying to do that for decades. So I guess what I'm getting at here is some of the things are, it comes with good intent, shall we say, but I find that some of these are untenable bridges to cross.
I think, let me jump in, because I think it's untenable. The self-certification to guidelines, that's like, we've tried that. Maybe we just haven't done it to the best way we could. I'd like to believe in the fact that people, developers included, will try to do the right thing. I don't think there's anybody out there doing the wrong thing on purpose, except for criminals, right? So if you're in corporate development, you've got a job to get done. So your job is to develop software to the following requirements and specifications. You'll do it as fast as you can, because that means you can go on to the next thing. That's how it works. I think software people are measured on reliability, meaning, and durability, meaning, does it fall over? Is it scalable? Is it performant? Is the user experience good? But they're not measured on is it secure necessarily. And I think where I diverge a little bit off of Kelly's viewpoint is that she says the common enemy is where was that line?
Unintended behaviors.
Unintended behavior. So yeah, but I think that there are security issues that cause downtime, and then there are security issues that steal data. Those are separate. They're different. And while I think her approach can solve for security issues that cause downtime, which I'll give her that. This is a valid approach. If we put our nose to it, maybe we can get there. It doesn't get us to the other part, right? The software that has problems that you can't steal stuff from. It doesn't get us to insecure. It doesn't solve the problem of like, hey, how do we manage third-party devices in our environment, right? So,
that whole paragraph that you just called out, the last sentence, having separate pipelines, observability stacks, or review processes for every contributing factor to unintended behavior would be an operational disaster, and yet cybersecurity insists on precisely this for itself. I would say 100% no, we're not trying to do that. We're trying to move to this shift left model. For years, we've been saying, put the security checks in the IDE or as close to the IDE as possible for the developer, so that they're seeing these things as bugs that are coming up early when it's still fresh in their mind and they can fix it alerting them, making them a part of the solution and integrating ourselves into their pipelines. I don't think I've seen a security organization build a separate pipeline. Have you guys? Have
I
you
think
seen
that's
this?
probably fairly common. I don't think it's uncommon. I think the idea of people moving into the development pipeline is a fairly recent thing over the last few years. A lot of places, you know, security teams sit completely separate, siloed. They run their tools, they do their stuff, and slowly we're seeing people kind of merge over, and now we're seeing results go into where the developers get their stuff. But I'd be interested to see how many places out there still track their security bugs in a different system than they track their software development bugs. Because I guarantee it's probably a high number, right? Like there's a lot of places still that haven't fully integrated where everything's in Jira or everything's in ADO, but they've got, oh, well, we track security over here in ThreadFix, and, you know, we do all our stuff there, and then we do something else, right? Like there's still a lot of places, I think, that are doing that.
Well,
that's very separate.
I think there's two problems there. One is integrating into the existing developer pipeline, but then there's post-release where you're going to find like a log4j, right? That's probably going to come through a traditional kind of vulnerability management program. Integrating that back into the loop, and she alludes to this about, you know, these long lists of stuff to triage and other things. But then going on to talk about, I just think the approach of this whole thing rubbed me the wrong way, maybe because it cuts a little too close, but like empire building may feel good, but it's bad for everyone. I don't know, Jim, you made the comment about how we turned to asking for a seat at the table, but you know, when development was the purview of the CIO and the CIO has a seat at the table, and now in a product-led organization, it's often the CTO, they have a seat at the table. Where are we supposed to be?
That's a good argument. I mean, but I think I'm not necessarily arguing that we do or don't need to see the table. What I'm saying is a little bit to where I think James mentioned earlier is the sort of personalities that are I think I see it as the demand for respect, right? And that whole sort of branch of activity, and if I would put it succinctly, is kind of a distraction, right? I'm not saying it's not worthy, okay, but I'm saying is that when you're trying to get more respect, sometimes you can over rotate and not find a balance point. And I may sound a little bit, you know, Zen yin yang here a little bit, but I think everything you can find a balance. It takes two to tango. And I think in this particular case, obviously she's, well, to put it perturbed, but I think this is an over rotation. And it also interpretation of things that she's directly exposed to, where I don't think, you know, entirely is correct. But, you know, you could argue, and in some aspects, security is over rotated to that point. In this case, I think it's over rotating in the other area. There's a lot of, you know, a lot of isolation type of activities, interpretations, when in fact is you have to, as anybody, whether it be application security or IT, is you have to respect what the business needs to accomplish and find ways of doing that and providing value to the business. So this argument she makes, for example, around, you know, not being seen or not being supported, you know, from the business and providing that value or rosy or whatever you want to call it, and then compares it, well, other divisions do that. She's absolutely correct. So I think is we need to find that balance of, we're not here just for security. We're not here just to make applications. We're here to move things forward for the organization. And you have to find your role within that spectrum and be able to work with others. I know it sounds a little bit, you know, perfect world scenario, but to your point earlier about being shifting left, and these are all very valid comments, but I'm with James on that a little bit. Every time I see any kind of application development environment, security is still separate, whether, and sometimes by design by either of those organizations. And I think that's a struggle, but
I want to build on top of that. And I'm going to say the one thing that in this, what to do instead of roadblocking. And as I was reading that, I actually found myself agreeing with quite a bit of this, but the part that really kind of struck home is, and because the cybersecurity team does not have software engineering expertise, it's often divorced from how software delivery actually works. 100% true from my experience. It is, and I know this is changing, right? So there's the corporations out there that are doing software security better. James, you might have some experience in this as well. They're bringing the actual people with development background like yourself, Mr. Jardine there, into the security organization saying, all right, help us develop better. But for the majority of my time in AppSec, it was security people that know how to blow shit up, pardon my French, but not really how to build shit, would show up. I literally, this is what I would do. I would go, use Burp Suite or some AppSec tool, deconstruct the heck out of an application that they're trying to launch. Hey, here's all the places where it's broken. Go fix it. They'd be like, how? Well, I don't know. I don't know how to develop this stuff. That's your job. I just know what's wrong with it. And that was from the early, from 2001 through about, I don't know, 2010.
Go to 2015, Raf. Go at least to 2015 was probably the standard still.
And
right?
In a lot of places, it probably still is the standard. And I totally get her frustration in this because that sucks.
Yeah. And that's something, I've talked about for a long time, because when I first got into doing security, I was one of the few in AppSec that had AppSec backgrounds, right? A lot of people came from, we had people that were in networks, and then security came along and they're like, oh, I'll do security. So they did network security. And then they were like, well, we need AppSec security. And they're like, well, I do security. I'll do AppSec security. And it was just that. They didn't understand that. As you said, Raf, that is changing, right? You are seeing a lot more AppSec engineers that come from a software development background. But of course, we fight that challenge of still, the entry-level cybersecurity roles where people just want to come in. And I will tell you from doing a lot of interviewing, right, there's still a lot of people that they're tool jockeys, right? Like they know how to work the tools, but they don't know how to do anything past reading the outputs and feeding the tools. So we have that risk. What I think is interesting, actually, reading through some of these things is trying to gauge into what she's actually saying. Like when she talked about the self-certification to guidelines, if you actually read through that, really what she's saying is you don't give enough detail. Like everything's very vague. And that's what we've always done. I remember when we do pen testing, right? You have cross-site scripting. What you should do, outputting code. Like that, it's vague, right? Just outputting code. Or input validation and outputting code. But there really wasn't specifics, right? And so she's saying, like, hey, we have coding guidelines, but they're vague. They're not really there. And what security really relies on, and she quotes this in here, right, is I know it when I see it. And that's always, that's been kind of the security. I can't really explain it. Remember back when it was security was a you're born with it or not born with it? Like it was a special skill that not everybody could do. And it's this, oh, well, I know it when I see it type of thing. I think in that aspect, really the complaint there is that we can't really define what we're looking for. We're just kind of like, if I see it, that's a security issue, right? And there's that vagueness. And I think as you look through some of these things that are pointed out, that's where the real story is that our coding guidelines suck, and we need better ways to push that stuff through so people know actually what is right, what is wrong.
So a couple of points there. One, I've done development and you don't want my stuff in production. That's why I went back kind of to the infrastructure side, because I suck at it. I tinker, but it's not production quality stuff. However, in where I sit, I get to talk to a lot of different organizations every day, every week. And in large organizations with decentralized development, having any sort of a standard that's going to be applicable at a granular enough level to be implemented is a documentation burden that is insurmountable. I mean, when I was at Amazon, you could build whatever you wanted. You could use whatever IDE you wanted, as long as you checked it into this spot so it could go through the testing, right? So everybody's implementing things in different languages with different libraries and doing their own little jam session. No one ring could rule them all, though we tried and tried and tried. We had self-certification. We were constantly finding apps that didn't meet the standards or were processing sensitive data that they shouldn't have been in ways that they shouldn't have done. We couldn't find them all. These developers are creating things faster than security can even be aware of them, which is why I think this whole integration into design reviews process that is described is also not possible at any kind of scale in these types of organizations. And I was chatting with a gentleman just yesterday. He's got 750,000 person organization, and to her point about abandoning the perimeter and moving, COTS devices into isolation patterns with isolating COTS software. That's exactly what they do. And they're very, very advanced, but they're still having trouble scaling even some of the rudimentary things that she's describing. Yeah, I think it's a great goal, but I'm not so sure that the approach and the tactics are going to get us there.
And if I may add, and so I was going to comment related to that specifically, Brandon, is the point about where she says, for example, the queue or message broker with regard to elongating the release process out to, 6 months, how that is not, how is this okay kind of thing. I mean,
Yeah.
I can't, that argument's been around forever, right? But then you look at it from another direction and you're saying, okay, you want us to work more smoothly and you understand your processes. A little bit to your point, James, is like, okay, so you don't want us involved, but you also want us to give you very specific code examples. It's like cake, eat it, and I'm just like, okay, this is a classic example where I think some of it is compartmentalization of, responsibility. You carry the buck. Oh, you want to be important, then you take it. And then it's just, it's creating a lot of friction where I think it's unnecessary. And to your point, especially, is these things are hard to do because the application development world is fast. I mean, brutally fast, and taking on all kinds of different things and exploring and innovating in ways to drive the business forward. And that's very difficult from a security perspective to keep pace with, right? And so I agree with her. We really shouldn't be slowing things down. So in some ways, this is kind of just argumentative, right? But some of her points, I think, are a little bit dated. Well, in that case.
Well, also, so I'm going to come back and tie that to what James said earlier also on the development skill set, or the builders versus the breakers, as Raf said, right? I was talking to a good friend of mine who's a deputy CISO in an organization that will remain nameless. And he has given up on hiring those entry-level cybersecurity people. He's bringing in junior devs because everything, even in his own tool stack, is API first. And so they're building the glue to stitch his own security stack together. At the same time, they have the expertise. He's teaching them the security expertise to be applicable to the business from the dev side. But you have to have a strong architecture team to even make this approachable. And they've had architecture failures because the devs don't properly think about how to build an application before it gets built. To Jim's point, speed, get it out the door. And they're not building resilience into the system itself. And I'm all for the resilience argument. Again, my critical infrastructure background, keeping the beer cold and the lights on is always job number one. But I think that we can bring the skills to the table through that dev pipeline of talent instead of necessarily a security specific one, and it'll serve us all a lot better. But we have to have a strong architecture team that's guiding the principles and owning that relationship, I think.
Well, I think, and as you pointed out, Brandon, earlier on, right, like teams do whatever they want, right? I mean, you could sit there and say, hey, we're a .NET shop, and then all of a sudden you got Node.js apps popping up all over the place. You've got this all around here. The one thing that this doesn't really cover, and I don't think anything typically covers this, is the idea that it's still this idea that it's security's job to secure the pipelines and the applications and do all this stuff. But as we talk about all these different aspects, there's nobody saying, hey, development needs to step back and say, look, if you guys want to have better security in your applications, you need to realign how you're doing things. There has to be a step back and a self-evaluation to say, okay, what do we need to be able to do here? We know we need X, Y, and Z. Maybe we don't want to allow every language under the sun to be used for this. We're going to limit down to this, this, and this. There's going to be responsibility here that you help create the coding guidelines. We know how to solve for XSS. We know how to solve for SQL injection. Like, why are the engineering teams not focusing on that? And one of the big things, somebody put a post out, and I've been thinking about this for a long time, right, is why are the engineering teams not looking internally to say, look, if I'm going to hire a developer, I need a new developer, I need a new QA tester. Why do job requirements not have anything to do with, do you have any type of secure development experience? Every company has a post out there for an application security engineer that says, we need you to train the developers on secure development. So if you're coming from any of those companies, you should have some sort of secure, right? Why are we not starting to require that our developers and our QA testers and our business analysts have some form of security experience? They're not security experts, but they understand, right? If I were to ask you, hey, tell me how you handle third-party components in your app and patching your application, and what are some techniques around that, hopefully you've got something around there that you've seen to deal with that stuff. Or how do you handle when security sends you development defects? All that stuff, we should be pushing that. And then if you want to move up, I want to go from an engineer 1 to an engineer 2, we expect a little bit more out of you for being able to do this stuff. You can lead threat modeling, or you can do this other stuff. But nothing is ever put on the engineering teams to say, hey, you need to start actually requiring some of this, because due to the scalability, there's no way you're going to get enough engineers on the security side to start doing your code reviews for every PR that comes out, for every different, right? That's going to drop to static analysis. You have to have developers that understands, hey, this is what secure XML processing looks like. And this is, this is what we're looking for. You do code reviews. It's part of the role.
But you should also be able to go back to standard libraries. Do you want security dictating what your developers can use and pull from? I mean, there was a report that came out 2 days ago that said 38% of Java apps still affected by Log4j. For crying out loud, whose job is that to fix? Right? Everybody knows it. It was like a Y2K moment when that bomb went off. Why is this still a problem, and whose responsibility is it to fix it? You want to talk about reliability engineering? You're going to find a defective part. You want to have a recall, replace and fix that. Tesla, I'm talking to you with your software update. But that's how it's done. So there has to be something on the other side of the fence when this thing goes to production that needs to have a feedback loop back to the developers.
James actually tapped into, I think, an underlining tone to her argument. And I remember very early on thinking, wow, security is omnipresent. And also, it is not effective on its own, right? So for example, if you want to implement something, you got to go to the IT team. You want to change a certain context around, say, maybe training and awareness, you got to go to HR. You don't really have total control over something in many cases, right? I know there's variations on that theme. So I remember thinking, okay, as a security expert, I'm able to help guide that process and help that strategy. And that's when it's sort of mushrooming into these large security organizations and so forth. But the fact, with respect to the tone of the article and the fact that James brings up that responsibility of security, one could argue that is the phase that I think we're moving into. And her, let's just say, I won't say emotional, but intense representation of that change, combined with some of the fears that I'm sensing within the security industry, going, oh my God, what's my future mean? Because now all these other people are doing security, right? I think we're at an inflection point. I honestly believe. For example, go look at CIO job descriptions, right? Up until recently, you never saw things like CISSP or CISA or CISM. Those are now actually in job descriptions for IT leadership at the executive level. So there's this situation where people are like, you know what? I get it. Security was important at one point in time, and I'm not saying it doesn't require strategic oversight, but in many ways, it's kind of going a little bit back to the old days where it was more of like, okay, how do we make this happen, and working with these different groups and bringing everybody's knowledge up on security. And then simultaneously, I think we've come a little bit, and I think James more than implied this, picking on you a little bit, James, but is sort of this click sort of tool-oriented security world we're living in right now, right? So it's naturally swinging over. So your point about training people up, we're seeing that demand actually manifest in other roles that were traditionally not including security, and it's absolutely moving in that direction.
Which isn't removing the need for security by any means. That's what, like, it's that difference. If you go back to build the empire statement, right? Like, building the empire caused a problem because it was like, hey, I'm just going to keep throwing resources at the old way we did stuff. So we use check marks to scan all our stuff. I need to have a security engineer that can review all those results. And it's like, no, I don't need a security engineer to do all that stuff.
Nope.
Like, we should be able to get that into dev. Devs should be able to review that. I've argued for the longest time. It's static analysis. It's code. A developer who spends their day writing code should be able to analyze that, right? So as we're sitting there trying to say it, but when we do the build the empire, now all of a sudden, it's not necessarily about the respect or anything like that. It's just by saying, hey, look, we're just going to keep throwing resources at the problem, but not addressing the problem, which is we want to keep doing it this way, which is a very heavily manual way, versus saying, hey, look, you know what? We're going to have a team and we're going to have 2 people. And if I only have 2 people, I'm forced to make it efficient, and I'm forced to push this alongside and say, hey, I need the developers to do this. I need the QA testers to be able to do this. Like, let it funnel down the pipeline so that by the time you get to the security team, what they're doing is very scoped, very limited, right? if the security team's putting a single quote into a field and finding SQL injection, like you have failed your whole process because that should have been caught someplace else. A QA tester should have been able to catch that.
No, that should have been caught in the IDE. And you just brought up a very valid point. A QA tester should be able to validate that. We already have a bifurcation. We have QA and test independent from dev, is what you're saying. That's the same problem we're struggling with right now, is security being independent of dev. So until you integrate these things into the mindset of the person writing the code, owning it, checking it in, making sure they don't break the build, making sure it passes the tests, putting those tests closer to their check-in process when they're running their scripts and their test harnesses at the beginning so that they can catch it. It shouldn't get to that far to production. You know what I mean? It's only after a net new vuln, see log4j, is discovered, in my opinion, that we should be coming back and closing that loop and saying, okay, no longer use this library, you've got to upgrade. I've talked to some folks they're saying, look, here's our standard, not an SBOM per se, but let's call it a gold image. If you're going to build something on top of this, here's the stack. And by the way, when you do your pull, if your build breaks because we've updated that, that's on you. You've got to fix your code because that's now the base secure component that we're dealing with, right? And I think that if you try to do that, you're going to run into mass hysteria about slowing the business down, to the earlier point.
Mm-hmm. All right. I want to go back to slightly, right? Because this is all related around her third point, which is build standardized patterns. I feel like we tried to do that. I feel like a huge goal that's a part of OWASP's entire charter, right?
Mission.
That was the mission statement, to build safer ways to do things. And it's been around for a long time, and it's made headway. The ES API was around for a while. I might still be. There are a lot of organizations, and I was part of one of them, where we said, you know what? We've gone through every single time we find cross-site scripting. Why don't we just go find something that can write a module that'll sanitize input, that I can just say, you know what? All developers, this is how you sanitize input. You use this module. Plug it in. If you don't plug it in, don't be expecting us to give you good results, right? We're going to find bad things. It was tough in the early 2000s. I would imagine that with all the different ways to put software out, the different frameworks, the different types of development environments, the different languages out there, this would be difficult but not impossible. But is it still a worthy, James, I'll start with you. Is it still a worthy cause to try to go that route today?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it calls out, right? Like a lot of this is done by platform engineering teams. The more you can build out that is, the paved road way of, hey, this is how we should be doing things, and we centralize it, and something goes wrong with that library, we can fix it in one spot, and hopefully everybody can update it. Although we've seen how people are at updating dependencies, but if we can keep it updated, we have that. The issue that starts coming in is just like DevOps, where it should have had a security included. We broke out and had to have DevSecOps or SecDevOps or whatever the heck we call it these days, right? We've got all this stuff about platform engineering, and the call out is, oh, well, platform engineers does this, but oh wait, they don't do security stuff. So you need to work with it, which I agree. Like you should be working with platform engineering. But what we're going to see come out of that is we're going to have a secure platform engineering group, because security is special and they have to have their own thing. But yeah, I mean, I think like the more you can get that's consistent across the way. The problem with the platform engineering is, just like Brandon said, you've got all these people that are like, well, I'm going to go write in this. Well, my platform doesn't support that, right? So unless you can actually step back,
or your platform does, and now you got 15 different competing approaches to solving the same problem,
right?
Mm-hmm. And so, let me put it this way: how many security bugs are acceptable in a release? Right, that's the marker, right? How many are there?
That's a loaded question.
Is that no? Because okay, look, if I'm building this space shuttle, right? There's all kinds of, they would go through that stuff with a fine-tooth comb, right? Manned space missions. Now, granted, we mess up maybe some metric conversions when we send things to Mars and they crash, right? But at the same time, that's a different bar than I'm, releasing a new website to order dog food, right? Now the question is, well, if I've got, PII, or I've got, other sensitive information, right, to the point you made at the very beginning, I might want to put a little bit more structure around that and put a little bit more control around that. But at the same token, how many private space industry rockets have blown up lately? And yet Jeff Bezos is saying, hey, one of the reasons I stepped down from CEO of Amazon a couple of years ago is to give more attention to Blue Origin. This was in an interview with Lex Friedman the other day, saying we need to speed up. We need to make faster decisions. Well, maybe writing code to send people into space isn't where you need to be speeding up. Maybe there's a moment here where we need to maybe slow down and take a more measured approach. But at the end of the day, it comes down to how many vulnerabilities are you willing to allow to go out the door? What's your bar?
I love that question, because it the way you answer that, the way you think about that, gives me a good sense of how you think about everything else in security.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You nailed it. That's exactly what I was going to bring up. And also, this whole, I think there's this almost cultural thing about, if you're not moving fast, you're moving backwards, and this whole pressure to innovate, and sometimes at the expense of certain scenarios, when in fact, to your point specifically, Brandon, is some scenarios that's totally okay, right? It all depends on what you're dealing with. And I think that's where, of course, I think for me, just on the item on the third note is, that was the one that I skipped over because I just didn't quite get it. I'm like, well, duh. It was a duh moment for me a little bit. Like, I was like, well, I kind of thought, every time we get into these kind of interactions, this is what I think people are working towards collectively. So it was a little bit of a surprise, like, wow, you got a problem with this? And I've never said it's impossible. This one seemed a little bit on the side with abandoning the perimeter. It's like, yeah, okay. I mean, it didn't seem like a modern problem to me, right?
When you have this, you have this disconnect, right? Because you get in the organization and you're like, okay, well, we want to build this stuff, right? We want this paved road. Who builds it? You just stated that the security people don't have any software development background.
Yeah.
So they shouldn't be building it. We've seen some prominent security companies build their own secure browsers, and we saw how that turned out. So, you don't, you don't want them to take ownership of it. But then you're saying, well, the platform engineering team doesn't know the security side, so they can't take ownership of it. And the dev team wants it, but they don't want to take ownership of it. So it's all this, circling back around saying, well, who's going to own it? Because where does it really actually fit? I think a lot of companies talk about paved road, and then they just get a lot of places that nobody wants to step up and say, hey, we're going to do that. And so then it ends up not going anywhere.
I just find this fascinating because of one thing. This is where, I think security can play a role with regards to saying establishing sort of the larger criteria, like to our point exactly earlier, is what are acceptable levels of fault, right? Or exposure. I mean, I'm being very general in nature, but we do recognize that security is not working great overall. There's a lot of bad things happening, and we need to focus on, we always say keys of the kingdom and all that kind of stuff, but that's real. Like, we prioritize around what we need to protect, right? So why don't we just take that whole philosophy of prioritization and roll it through? And I think part of me, maybe this is a little bit naive on my part, but probably very naive on my part, but I think is we're so busy trying to say who's going to own it and who's the special person in this thing. And we're just passing the I'm special buck around the room, for God's sakes. Right. I mean, that's what I'm hearing, Yeah. And I think we need to move beyond that. But I think every person and group plays a role within the architecture of this. Right. So whatever happened to having that specialty capability and bringing that as part of that cadre to make the entire team work better. And I think, maybe this is just, this is the part, at least what I try to facilitate in organizations I'm working with in some ways. Like, okay, great. You facilitate that wonderfully. Let's do that. And then let's work in this way. But, I think there's a lot of still pointing fingers a little bit more than I may be aware of in this particular case.
I think that's where that's where our the security expertise comes in play, right? It's not about triaging flaws out of check marks. It's not about doing the manual pen testing and doing all that stuff. It's about the ability to understand the security risks and how they fit into the org, and then being able to know, like, we're kind of that wrangler of going and saying, okay, well, we need this paved road. Hey, I need the platform engineering team. I need the developer team. We need to get together and talk. Like, here's the things we need. Here's what they should be doing, and help kind of define out what should be there to help protect the platforms and the development and all that stuff. But then it's got to fall back on those teams to be able to say, this is how we're implementing this. You know, like why you have a security team saying, hey, we're going to go implement SAST for you. Like, no, we'll help you identify the SAST that works, right? And we can't do that on our own. I've seen companies that go out and they're like, hey, we've gone ahead, we're going to get check marks for you. And then you get the dev team on the call and they're like, well, you know, we work in the latest version of .NET. Like, yeah, we only support 2 versions back. You know, we don't cover the latest and greatest, you know, and then now all of a sudden like, oh, well, that's not going to work for our dev team. It's like, wow, if we'd only talked to the dev team beforehand, right? So our goal should be working with these teams and saying, hey, here's the stuff that's going to help get us where we want to be. But I'm not the best person to implement SAST into your pipeline and figure out the best way to get it to show up in your PRs and all that stuff. I am good at being able to recognize and say, hey, there's the risk. Here's what we're solving. But you figure out how to get that most efficiently put into your systems, and we'll help with oversight and we'll help with questions. And yes, we have the expertise of application security. So if you're not sure about this vulnerability, come talk to us. I'll tell you the risk. I'll tell you, you know, what might work, what might not work. But like building all that stuff in, like we've tried to take on so much and say, this is all us, you know, and then over the last couple of years, we've started seeing people like, huh, the heck with this. It's not all us. I can't triage 1,000 vulnerabilities a day unless I build that empire. Like you have to be able to start triaging this stuff, you know, so we have to be able to turn around and look at that and say, look, we're that wrangler, we're the advisor, we're the guidance to help get you there. And yes, outside of software security, right, there's a lot of cybersecurity. There's different roles. The SOC plays a different role than what somebody in application or product security team is playing.
There's plenty of security to go around.
Yeah, like there's a lot of different stuff, you know, so they're going to work differently than this. But if you want this, I don't write your code. I can't fix it. Right?
Well, let me ask you this. Let's assume we've got the perfect world. We've got the platform engineering. We've got the tools close to the developers. We're alerting the developers when even in their ideas, they write, hey, you just put that secret in there. That shouldn't be there kind of stuff, right? Checking that stuff right when their fingers on keyboards, right? The question fundamentally comes down to, if you can't triage all the problems, how much are you going to let go out the door? And I'll tell you, if you make this a quality problem on code, then the dev teams will self-select, because nobody wants that person on their team that writes really janky code, right, to begin with, that's really fragile, poorly architected, or has security bugs in it, right? So if we make this a quality problem, again, I'm staying pre-release, we still have to have that feedback loop post-release for discovery. But if we do all of this pre-release and build on the culture that already exists, they will weed themselves out.
Or elevate up,
just like,
right? I mean, that's what's going to happen, right? But you have to have that responsibility there that says you're expected to do this. We started this conversation with, you know, like there's no push and drive to say security, right? We know we have to have quality. We don't push and say, oh, well, I released 5 security bugs this week. So what?
That's why I said you make it a bug. You don't define it as a security bug. It's a design bug. It's a failure to meet the requirement. And how many of those are you willing to let go all the way through the pipeline to release based on your innovation needs, your speed to market, your budget, whatever? Because that's going to define what your outcome is, and whether or not, you know, the executive team is going to invest in putting out more stable, safer product. It's Paul Proctor put a post up on LinkedIn in October on this concept of kind of protection level agreements, and he touches on everything from you know, insurability, due care, a wide spectrum of things. But if you think about it from the context of what are you willing to let go out the other side, and let the leadership make the decision.
So 2 points I'd like to build on that. First is I want to recognize that great ideas like that are summarily challenged because of things like regulation and standards that have these like sort of very prescriptive activities that the security team is responsible for. And that's creating that sort of, you've got to cross all the T's and dot the I's kind of thing, which create some of the things she talked about and some of the slowing processes. So when you say, let's not call it a security flaw, but call it a bug, 100%, but let quality take care of quality. But how do we feed that up, that correct metric, so we understand what the risks are to the organization? And I think that creates it, right? So we have to think not just, oh, we'll make this one change, which I'm totally with you, but understand how upstream and downstream that we can facilitate that change in a meaningful way to start changing the culture of security, right? The other part, I think, to your point, is we have to come to the understanding that there is situations where not everything has to be perfect, right? But also is this really substantiates the point about building more security within that culture, right? So things are being done, and so that you don't have like a session key or something coded, or a password coded into something like that. So I think we have to sort of deal with how we deal with things in the where the rubber meets the road, but also doing it in a way that breaks down some of the barriers that are perceived at sort of the compliance level or program level and things of that nature. I hope I made myself clear.
All right, I'm going to wrap this up because we're running over on well, we ran over, but we're getting close on time here. But I found one interesting one thing I want to point out as we close up here. She makes a great, in the closing, it's towards better cybering. She makes a great statement. She says, we can behold tangible improvements, not vague successes like improved risk coverage by X%, end quote. That resonates. Real tangible results, not like fake fluffy, we made shit up numbers. Because, we made this application 20% less risky. Every time somebody says that, I have so many questions. What formula are you using? Is it replicable? Like, what does that even mean to you? Like, all that stuff, right? So I don't know. I think ultimately I'm about 80% with what she says. Some of this is really hard. Some of it's been tried and failed, which doesn't mean we shouldn't try again. Some of it's been tried and succeeded and didn't get I'd say it succeeded, but didn't quite get to where we wanted to. Like we tried the self-certification process. Brandon, you said it. That just simply, I don't think it works. Build standardized patterns. I want to say that we've tried that. I'm going to say a lot of us are trying that. It is a difficult thing to get done. Overall, Kelly, I think we're with you. We want this to succeed. I don't want to be a special snowflake. I think I've been saying this for years. Security being a special thing has hurt us in more ways than I can possibly expound on this on a podcast. But at the end of the day, it is slightly different in how we approach things. When things fail versus when they fail for security. Does it perform? Does it function? And is it secure? Those first two are related. The last one is hard to glue on to those first two. I have tried since the late 90s to make that work. And it's hard. Maybe it's me, but it is freaking hard. And so here's to getting it right eventually. Gentlemen, thanks for joining me. This has been fun.
Well, go take that NyQuil and get a nap, Raph. You sound horrible.
Yeah.
Don't go on vacation again. See what happens.
Listen, I go on vacation and I come back with a head cold. That's what happens. I regret nothing.
John, it's great to see you. Jim, it's been too long. I'm glad we brought us back together.
I know, it's amazing. Great to see you, Brandon. Been too long.
All right, guys. Thanks for joining. This has been another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Please go read the show notes. I will post the link to the link that Brandon was talking about, Paul Proctor's Holy Grail Cybersecurity post as well. Come back and see us again next week. And hope you're making it through December, folks. Thanks for joining us.